Hi guys, John here. Today we're going to look at Lineage and I want to talk about how do you incorporate feedback into your game design. So right here we have a tabletop simulator mod of Lineage, and this is kind of an older version. So this was about a month before GenCon, so about 2 months ago. And we have the map and we have the starting cards, and then we have some action cards across the river. We've updated the player boards somewhat, but this has mostly been the same game for about 3 months up to this point, changing small minor things. The main feedback at this point was trying to update the map, finding different things that would help the players. And so we made some adjustments to the map, add some reminder text. These things were mostly minor, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a save file of the GenCon changes. And so this is what I brought to GenCon. And when you're making a physical prototype, you have to consider cost. So everything you print costs money. Everything you're taking on a plane, for example, for me, takes up space. And so trying to think through what is a reasonable prototype. And so for me, that meant I did get some bunnies from Etsy, but I didn't get any carrot tokens. I just used simple squares or hexagon tokens for those. And then for the player boards, I just used pieces from other games. And then for these circles, I used rubber bands for my daughter's hair tie collection. So, got to make it work. And so I could have just used different tokens for the bunnies, but I thought, getting more invested in the game, let's go ahead and purchase some rabbits. Um, so let's look at some changes we made. So we made the board wider and a little bit narrower. So now it's 2 feet by 18 inches, so 24 inches by 18 inches. And that seemed to fit the table better than the square board we were aiming for before. So it's slightly narrower and more longer. And these cards now have this slight flow to them. And then we have these reminder texts here. So this is what we brought to Gen Con. And so we were at the first exposure playtest hall, and we are trying to see what people were doing, how they were respond to this. And so this is where I want to talk about feedback and understand, when someone says something, you have to choose what you're going to do with it. You can choose to ignore it, you can choose to buy it 100%, or you can choose to weigh it. And generally, that's what you need to do. You need to weigh all feedback and consider where it's coming from. And so the first playtest we had was basically this. And one of the things we noticed a lot was, as players were placing rabbits on these cards, they're immediately trying to do the action. And while that's true for these cards over here, you don't do that across the river. And so that was a problem. And that was a problem for all three playtests that we did, where players at first would try to get the thing and I would have to intervene. And then eventually, after the first couple of rounds, they would get it. But even still, there's sometimes the third or fourth round, players would still try to get this, and the other players would have to remind them that they couldn't. So that's with some feedback. So what do you do with that? Well, I think we kind of wait for now and see what the other feedback is, and then try to see if there's a simple solution that solves multiple problems. So that's the first problem: is players were not clear that when they place their bunnies across the river, they don't immediately take the action. They have to wait until all the bunnies are placed, and then they take those actions across the river. So that was the first feedback. Another point of feedback was, so you can see here that you have a card like this, a card like this. They're basically the same, even though they're across the river. They're different tiers. And so these cards that are randomized, it makes it feel really hard to know where to explore, what to scout, what to look for when you're actions because there's just not a lot available. And so you feel that it's just hard to understand what you're doing when you're first playing the game. After you're playing 3 or 4 times, I think it can be there, but we can't wait that long. We have to make sure the first play is fun, engaging, and accessible. And so this is why I was excited for Gen Cons because I've kind of played this game with several of my friends and family, and now they're getting to the third, fourth playtest, and so you're getting different feedback at that point. And so the other feedback was, why not change the setup to be tier based? So instead of having similar cards randomly placed, these cards would just be on the same level because they need just 1 effort each. So these cards would need 1 effort, these cards would need 2 effort, these cards would need 3 effort. It's funny in a way because this was similar to how we initially tried the setup, but I was making it a little too complicated. And so now what you're going to do is you're going to take all the 1 effort cards, shuffle them, put them in this first row, take all the 2 effort cards, shuffle them, put it in the second row, and all the 3 effort cards, shuffle them, put them in this row right here. Um, so that's kind of the plan now. And so we immediately changed that for the rest of the playtests. And then the second and third playtest, it felt much better. Scouting felt better, exploring felt better because the players knew that if I'm looking at a card here, it's going to take 2 effort. If I'm looking at a card there, it's going to take 3 effort and 3 bunnies. Um, so that was a problem that we can immediately test at Gen Con, and it was helpful. But that's still a problem. So let's talk about that problem. So we had the first problem of players placing bunnies and doing the thing immediately. The second problem was the cards were too overwhelming. And you can scale that down by changing the tiers. That's one way to solve it, but the problem is still that the text on the cards, for example, like this one, there's a lot of words. And this one, this is less words, some icons. Um, but something like this, that's a lot of text, especially if you're scouting it. Um, is there a way to make this effect easier and clearer to do? Um, and so that was the other problem with these cards was that is there a way to make the better icons and make icons more clear and then have a card that explains what the icons are? And so if you look at the icons we have a bunny, we have a bunny icon, we have 3 different skill icons, we have the ambition icons for the reputation, we also have the crown icon, now we have a card icon, and so our iconography is increasing quite a bit. And so if we can get a few more icons but then have a glossary that can fit on one poker card, which is the size of these cards, we can just get all that on one card, explain them. It will heavily reduce the word count and see how that goes. So that was the other point of feedback. All right, so we're just going to look at this card next. So in these play tests, I did not test this card because I knew that it was going to be kind of overwhelming. Um, and so I did ask for feedback on this. And the main feedback was winning the game and ending it early can feel really bad, especially for kids. And so that is something that I think some people could agree or disagree with, but that was the feedback. So what do you do? Do you 100% accept it? Do you just reject it because this is really part of the vision? Like I've shared before, like this is a really important card for the game that you can bypass the game, which is this empire wanting people to go back and move back, and instead just abandoning the empire and starting a new home as an immigrant family here with your new kids and your grandkids. That needs to be an option in the game, just to tell the full immigrant story. So, um, I feel very passionate about that. So, what do you do when people say that's not going to work? I think you need to really listen and think through: is there a way we can find middle ground? And one of the players suggested that instead of making it a win and ending the game early, you just make this card give a ton of points. And so, on one hand, that kind of defeats the purpose, but on the other hand, it can still work. And here's what I mean: instead of rejecting the king and the king being upset or frustrated, the king's actually very impressed, and he actually is saying, "This is the whole point of why I sent you here, to figure out that your families wanted to control the kingdom, but in reality, what they should have done was just start their own kingdom. You're finally getting the point of this." So I think that kind of paradigm change for me, and just thinking through what is the king trying to do with this exercise, so to speak. Um, I think that allows me to change this card in a way where the king can still reward you doing this, um, without undermining the rest of this. Because again, the king could be a benevolent king. He could be a gracious king. We don't have to see them as his antagonist. So, um, so that's the other change, is that this card, as it currently is worded, doesn't really jive with the rest of the game as it is. I would need to change if I wanted to keep that card. Other things would need to change. Um, and so that was the main feedback. Um, so we needed to change this new home card. We needed to change the icons, and then we needed to figure out a way to make it easier for players to do these action cards immediately, and then do these action cards across the river at the end of the season. Um, one aside I want to note here, one of the concerns I had for this game was that it would get compared to Everdell for a lot of different reasons. One is the rabbit theme is similar to some of the animals in Everdell. Everdell does have worker placement. Um, and one of our playtesters at GenCon, she had just played, and I believe she won an Everdell tournament right before she played. So it was great just to have her play it, give feedback, and kind of give me some insights, because I don't play Everdell. I've only played it one time. And she said that while there are similar elements and hooks at the beginning, it plays very, very different. And it feels very, very different. So that was encouraging to hear that I didn't accidentally make a game that already exists. Um, so I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to load in the changes I've made on Dexterous. And so I'll see you in just a second. Okay, so with Dexterous, you can export components as a TTS, saved objects. So I just loaded those in real fast. This does remind me, one of the changes I did make was based on feedback on these cards, the King's Favorite cards. The icons were not big enough, maybe slightly bigger. And so we made that change. So we made this a little bit bigger and changed kind of the format of the card slightly. So this is the old one, and then this is the new one. So we made the font bigger, and so it's easier to read and move it up a little bit. And then this is the icons. So we have 4 of these reminders for the players. And so now we have Prestige, we have Rabbit, Effort, Action Card, and then we see some new ones. And so if you look at Explore and Scout, those are cards that have a lot of words to explain something really simple. So Explorer set is basically saying, hey, you can flip over a card. And some other things with it. Same thing with Scout. And the question is, can you summarize that with just a simple icon? I think the answer is yes. And so, and then the other thing was immediately. Immediately is a lot of characters. It is a simple idea to say immediately versus end of season. But if you can summarize that with an icon, that's going to help distinguish very quickly this versus these cards up here. And so we thought about that. So we made some icons for that. And then put the rest of the icons that we already currently have on this sheet as well. And so icon bloat is something I am concerned about. And we're going to try this and see, is this too many icons? I think we have 14 icons so far. And all I added was 1, 2, 3, 4 icons. So we had 10 icons, now we had 14. So we already had 10 icons. And now we're having 14. And this does fit. I could probably fit one more icon on this comfortably before it just wouldn't fit a poker card probably. And we'll see. We may just get rid of this and just change it completely. So let's look at some of these cards. So Cloud Gaze. So we have current old state and GenCon state was this. New state is this. So you can see that instead of using the word immediately, we're using a lightning bolt to say right now. And so we're going to have that for all these cards. So instead of that, we're having this. So that's pretty simple. We're not gaining a lot by this. It wasn't needed per se for these 3 cards, but it is helpful because we're going to use this icon on these cards up above. So let's look at Scout. So Scout was immediately gain 1 blue inspiration, reputation. You may look at any action card across the river, then return it face down and place your effort on it. You may do this up to 2 times. So kind of wordy. So this one says immediately lightning bolt, gain 1 blue reputation. You may spend an effort to scout, which is or to peek, and return the card face down and place your effort on it. Do this up to 2 times. So similarly wordy, but it doesn't feel that way. And so you could argue even that you don't have to say the second sentence, return the card face down, place your effort on it. But for now, we're keeping it. And so I think that was helpful change. Let's look at explore. All right, so old state, immediately gain 1. You may flip over any face down card and place your effort on it. You may contend with that with additional experience, but ignore the effort requirement. So another very wordy one. Now it's the lightning bolt, game 1. You may spend effort to flip it over. You may contend for that card with their card bindings and skills, and you may add more effort. So this one is less words for sure, and still perhaps maybe a little wordy. And so this is where we're going to iterate this and see, okay, does this work? Can we find a way to get this one and scout less words? I think words are fine. Words may be necessary, but can we find a way that is more accessible, more easy to communicate the idea behind these cards? Let's look at this one. So refocus. Current state was this one, and then now is pretty similar. All right, so now I have the lightning bolt on these. Let's look at new home. So start a new home. So now we have a new icon here. So this is end of season. So instead of where you have to say win the game at the end of the season, you can just do end of season. And then the other change is it's saying you gain 9 prestige. if all your bunnies are on this side of the river and continuing on at least 2 other cards at end of season. So this one is, instead of winning the game, it's still going to do the same check. If all your bunnies are across the river, but instead of winning the game, it's going to give you 9 points. Why 9 points? One of the interesting things about Lineage has been that at the end of the 3rd generation, after the 3rd season, the difference between 1st and 2nd place is usually a couple of points. 3rd place, 4th place, sometimes they are lagging behind, but generally it's not by more than 7 points. Sometimes it may be 9 points. But getting this to fire off once or possibly twice will definitely win you the game. And it doesn't have to be 10 points, 20 points. It can just be 9 points. You also have 9 effort in the game. You have 9 seasons in the game. 9 is less than 10, so it's a single-digit number. There's a lot of reasons to go for 9. And so we're going to try it. So a lot of these changes have not yet been tested yet. But this is kind of where we are with adjusting to this feedback. So let's look at some other cards. So for example, this card, we have the new icon, so at end of season. And so that's kind of how these cards are changing, is that, so for example, instead of having this, you add the icon. If you notice, we're also trying the tier on the card. We may just remove that because it may not be necessary if you have the effort as the requirement for the tiers. You don't need to list the tier on the card, but we're going to try it anyway just to see what the feedback is. It also is helpful to distinguish between which card is which by having that little tier marker at the bottom in the middle. So for example, cultivate the land was this. Now we have that. So now we're incorporating up here the icons that we made for primarily these 3 cards. And so the icons have helped also inspire some more ideas for action cards. Now that we're not worrying about doing randomness throughout the 15 slots, but just 5 slots is random for each tier, so you're guaranteed 5 of each tier. That does allow for more variety and changes. Another thing that we're now thinking through is what would it look like to have a card with both immediate effect and an end of season effect, both for these cards at the homeland, and then for these cards across the river. So for example, let's say Liberate Bunnies has an end of season effect that gives you these things, but also has an immediate effect. So you can do an action card, and getting outmaneuvered on it isn't the end of the world because you still got 1 benefit out of doing it. So that's something we're trying to think through now that we have clear icons. And so this is where the feedback was very helpful, not just in changing the game right now, but getting ideas of what could this game look like in its final state. I think I've said this before, but this game is nowhere close to being done. We're still in the idea phase. We're still figuring out how the systems work. And while I think the core design of what are you doing is pretty set, we're trying to think through, how do you present it? How do you communicate it? How do you make it engaging? And so I think having cards, especially these tier 1 cards, having a difference between end of season and immediate effects may be very helpful, and possibly also for the tier 2 cards, just to have an immediate effect versus immediate and end of season effect versus just only end of season effects across the river. Having some variation, I think, would be helpful, and it's helping players to realize that the bunny stays regardless, but sometimes you get a permanent thing immediately, sometimes you don't get it till at the very end. And there's other smaller feedback I could talk about, but that was kind of the main things I've learned at Gen Con, just talking to players, people I never met before. And I hope this was helpful for you, to not just play your game idea with just your friends or family, but to go to a convention, to go to a game shop, and just say, let's try this idea. Would you be willing to play my game? And just to really listen to the feedback, whether it's really positive, really negative. You need to weigh it. And with friends and family, sometimes they're just really, really nice. Um, and so just getting that feedback from players that this game does work, current state, it works. There's just some obstacles and some barriers that need to be removed before it really can shine. And that's kind of what the work is now, is what really is working and how can we make that shine even brighter? What can we make easier? And ultimately make the best game possible. So I hope this was helpful and enjoyable. I'll see you next time. Bye.